Warm greetings from Chennai Center for China Studies and National Maritime Foundation, and a warm welcome to distinguished participants, veterans, research scholars, interns, and all the distinguished guests present this evening. If there is a single dominant factor that has changed the course of warfare in human history, it is technology. Technological advances have helped evolve new war strategies and doctrines at various stages in history. Directed energy weapons using high energy lasers and microwaves are emerging military technologies are seen as critical in future warfare. Development of directed energy weapons are seen as particularly important in the context of India's worsening security environment, especially with China. The continuing military confrontation in eastern Ladakh is a reminder of the challenges that China poses to India. Beijing's growing economic power, including in space, cyber, and electronic warfare domains, can inflict significant damage on its adversaries, including India. The Indian security analysts argue that the country could be vulnerable as technology advances in China continue to grow. There are recommendations that India consider the possibility of developing an offensive capability in this regard. Given the intensifying security dynamics in India's neighborhood, Indo-Pacific and beyond, it becomes a subject of focus for the Chennai Center for China Studies to discuss and deliberate upon. It's a great privilege for me to introduce our distinguished speaker for today, Lieutenant General P.R. Shankar, former Director General of Artillery retired, and distinguished member C3S, and our distinguished moderator for today, Mr. L.V. Krishnan, former nuclear scientist, Director Safety Research Group, Indira Gandhi Center for Atomic Research, Kalpakkam, and distinguished member C3S. On this note, I would like to hand over the floor to Director C3S Commodore R.S. Vasan for his introductory remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Bala. I think already the context has been set. Let me also acknowledge the presence of Executive Director, National Maritime Foundation, and many other naval officers who are here in the forum. And this is something which is very important. And when we are looking at the topic for discussion, we did have informal discussions within the group. Thanks to Mr. L.V. Krishnan, who brought in many points related to this. And there was, of course, I'm sure a lot of you would have seen the wonderful article that was written by General Shankar, which was also shared here in our group. And that's where that's when there were serious doubts about whether China did actually use the high energy weapons in the mountains, because that's what they claimed in the Global Times, and their spokesmen were going all over saying that we were able to vacate the heights by use of high energy weapons. So I recommend that you read General Shankar's article, because it's not only full of facts, but also he's made it very witty, because some of these statements can only be made after you had 3 or 4 drinks in a Shanghai bar, and you come out and you talk about what has happened over here. So please read that article. It's very, very interesting. And we thought it's appropriate for us to look at it, because then we had this famous case of what happened to the diplomats in 17 and 18 in some of the diplomatic missions. I'm talking about the American diplomats who are there. And they were subjected to a lot of tests. It was established that possibly there was some kind of an attack which played up with their neural systems, and so they had to face these issues when they returned to USA. So it's nothing new. It's not that the high energy weapons are suddenly come on the scene. The research on this has been going on for decades. And I must tell you, as a naval officer, there are many of us, of course, here. When we joined the Navy, when we went on the ships, there were 2 areas where there were high energy sources, and we were asked to be careful about this. One was, of course, you obviously could not have climbed the mast, because one was because the antennae were rotating. The other is they were also having high energy, which would cause certain amount of. So the officer of the day, officer of the watch, would always be careful about ensuring that these places are not, accessed by anybody. We also have Captain Arasu. Arasu, just show up your face, please. who's again from the Navy, and he stood first in the ASW course. That's the anti-submarine warfare course. Why I mention is this: the sonars which are used in the Navy, they are again one form of high energy weapons, you can call it, because during not only 71 war, but also during the IPAF operations, and I was commanding a ship, of course, at that time. Now we intentionally would switch on the sonar at time to ensure that the divers did not come close by, because something at the level of 230 decibels was something that would be extremely painful for divers if they came close to. So this is also used by police for dispersing codes, etc. So in that sense, it also becomes a dual use weapon. So with this, and I thought I'll just mention some of these areas because it's a very interesting field. There are research going on everywhere. You all have heard of Thor, which is now being used as anti-drone. When the swarm of drones come in, use the high energy weapons again to shoot them down, or use the high energy for against electronic equipment, or use the microwave for the water which boils under the skin. So there are a lot of this. So for to discuss this, we have two experts, General Shankar, of course, who's we are very fortunate to have him. I think he writes one article after breakfast. The next one for building appetite, he writes just before lunch. And so that he can get good sleep, he writes one just after dinner. So 3 articles a day is his prescription, like 2 thoughts a day. And so we are very happy to have you with us, Shankar, to talk about this. And Mr. L.V. Krishnan, who is our solid support as far as CPS activities are concerned. And I must also thank NMF for joining hands with us on this, because this is an area of great interest, not just for the Army or the Air Force, but also for the Navy, which is delving into the future of warfare. With that, may I request Mr. L.V. Krishnan to conduct the proceedings. Thank you, Mr. Krishnan. All yours.
Thank you, Commodore. One second. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay, good. Now, the Commodore has made some very pertinent remarks. Let me say a few words about what I have to acknowledge about the directed energy weapons. Now, the choice of the topic today is commendable, but more so is that we are having General Shankar as a speaker. And I have been a fan of his blogs on the Gunner Shot. The reason why I like them is not for what he says, but how he says it. What impresses the reader is that he's bold, quite blunt, with short, witty statements. Apparently, it reflects his professional background. And as the Commodore Vasa mentioned, he has also written about directed energy weapons, and that was quite educative to me. Now, as you're all keen to listen to him, I'll be quite brief. As of the present, only lasers and high-power microwave-based weapons have been developed and continue to be. The time for the particle beam weapons has not yet come. On laser technology, as in many other instances, India began early, but subsequent progress in applications has been limited to a few areas. Let me recall my own experience. The optic laser was first demonstrated in the US in 1960. Very soon after that, my colleagues in the Atomic Energy Establishment Trombay Laboratory were trying to build lasers, and some were working on accelerators. Dr. Bawalkar, who had just then got his PhD from my university in UK, was brought in, recruited in 1967 to lead the group on lasers. Now, as work in these two areas, lasers and accelerators, picked up, there was no space for expansion in Trombay. A new Center for Advanced Technology was set up in 1987 in Indore with Bawalkar as director. Remember, that was the time when Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, also known as Star Wars, was making news. Now, CAT developed a variety of lasers but to meet DAE needs like precision machining, cutting, drilling, welding, etc. in radioactive environments. They also made some lasers for surgery and supplied to hospitals. Additive manufacturing was another interest of theirs, but not weapons. Now, accelerator work in DAE was oriented towards basic physics studies. Pulsed accelerators to produce high power microwaves were also built, but their sizes were too large and were useful only for testing materials. Now, after his retirement, Bawalkar set up an industrial outfit called Quanta Lace that produces lasers and also essential components for lasers like lenses, mirrors, and so on. Now, to return to today's topic, several factors have to be considered to choose the right platform for laser weapons, bearing in mind the mission. The sources of energy, these vary in nature and requirement and determine the size. The laser frequency, power, pulse repetition rate, and pulse duration, the replenishment of the energy source, also defense against enemy lasers. Now, for the type of lasers that India would need for weapons purposes, the supply of chain of components for production must also be considered. And that applies also to high power microwaves. Now, if you look at the directed energy weapons scene in the India-China context, it seems to me it is a land border that should take precedence at the moment, and tactical applications, not strategic. The Chinese, of course, are talking about strategic applications as well, but maybe we will also have to go in for it, but not in the immediate sense. Very possibly our defense forces are already engaged in it, and we should be able to protect ourselves against the UAV swarms. And I think high pressure microwave, high power microwaves are better suited for that. Now, what do we know about the Chinese capability in directed energy weapons and how to be prepared? These are some thoughts that come to my mind, but I think we should listen to the General for his valuable insights. Over to you, General.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot for your opening remarks, and thanks a lot for Commodore Watson about what he spoke, and Bala also. At the outset, let me put across a few issues to all of you before I give you a formal presentation. First and foremost, I'm not an expert on DEW, directed energy weapons. I'm not a technical guy also. I'm just a BSc from National Defense Academy. But I've developed interest in this because of being in the gunners. The second thing is the entire field of directed energy weapons, at the outset, I must tell you, is a costly field. If you go back to what was mentioned by Dr. Krishnan about the Strategic Defense Initiative of USA, Reagan's Star Wars, the entire Star Wars program was so costly. When Russia tried to match them, they broke. They gave up. It's a very costly field. At that time, they couldn't succeed, space-based weapon systems and all. Things have not changed. Technology has progressed, but things have not changed. Microwaves and lasers have found extensive use in our civil life, but their conversion rate into weapons are not that much as is being spoken of, whether it's at tactical level or strategic level. Most of us are under the view that China can do everything. It can do nothing. Let me be very blunt about it, right? And everyone says, look, they're going to have so many satellites and space-based weapons. They're going to shoot lasers down, and one laser will come and hit our parliament building. It will not happen for n number of reasons, which I'll explain. Towards the end of my talk, I'll explain to you why it cannot happen. Right? With this, I'll give you an exposure of the fundamentals of lasers in a very non-technical manner, so that you understand lasers, you understand microwaves, and understanding the basic concepts is more important, right? With this, I'll just start my presentation. Yeah, can you see the slides?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you can see this?
Perfect, sir.
First class. Right, 1 minute. Okay, we will talk of this directed energy weapons in the Sino-Indian context. And okay, as Commodore Vasan had said, last year there was suddenly a article in which this chap Jin Canrong, he's a professor of international relations at Beijing's Renmin University. Oh, this fellow claimed that there's a micro weapon used on strategic hilltops, and it was turned into a microwave oven. We were forced to retreat. They retook positions with all that, and within 15 minutes of weapons being deployed, those occupying the hilltops began to vomit. They couldn't stand up, so they fled. Now, it was a very funny thing. That's what set me off in this journey. First of all, this fellow is not even a scientist. He's a professor of international relations. Okay, and he started talking of microwave weapons. And what's more, he put out a video on this, and I saw that video just today morning. He's got no bloody clue about any of these technologies. Then, very funnily, this report was filed in the Times in UK and Australia, nowhere else. It was actually planted. And so when I went into it, and I also confirmed from the Indian Army whether this actually happened, and I officially and unofficially, everyone said, "Sir, no, nothing of this kind happened." So, and that was the end. I wrote that story. Okay, but now let's understand this thing a little better. This entire business of microwaves and directed energy weapon and lasers and all that lies in the electromagnetic spectrum. Without going into detail, what are you talking of? You're talking of microwaves and you're talking of this visible light. It is this area which you are looking at. Beyond this, X-rays, gamma rays, etc., you go into the nuclear realm. This, of course, below this, you come into the other issues of electromagnetic spectrum. It is basically radars and things like that. Right? Okay. What Commodore Vasan said is very important. If you come into the beam of any electromagnetic wave, you will get affected. And if that beam is strong enough, you will have physical effects. Right? So it is only natural that you need to avoid them. Everyone will tell you don't go in front of a radar. So that's the fundamental thing. But now we'll look at these in a little more. What is a directed energy weapon? A DW damages its target with highly focused energy. So that means you need to focus this energy onto a target, like it's shown in these pictures. It could be a laser, microwave, and particle beams. Particle beams will not talk, as Dr. Krishnan himself said. Particle beams are too difficult to handle in the battlefield scenario, and for ranges and all that. And that technology is different, so no one is pursuing it. They might pursue it later, but we'll not talk of it. Now, the potential application of this technology includes weapons which could target personal, missiles, vehicles, and optical devices. It could be any of this. We'll see each of these. Now, what does directed energy weapon do? It deposits some energy on the target, and the interaction between the energy which is deposited on the target, right, and the energy itself, there's this interaction, and that has to sustain itself for a specified period of time for a particular damage. It is transfer of energy. And transfer of energy is critical, whether it's a directed energy kill, soft kill, as they say, or a hard kill. Even in a kinetic energy kill, that is a shot hitting a plate of steel in its fundamental sense, there's a transfer of energy. Half mv squared is transferred to the target, whether it's a ship-based thing or a tank or whatever. Right. Hence, the DEW must produce a lot of energy at source. It should cater for loss and propagation, because when it moves through air, it does degrade. And then the residual energy at the target should damage the target. That's important. As a whole, without going into the technicalities, these DEWs tend to be bulky and they need large power generators. Now, battlefield is generally starved for power, right? It's not a simple thing to generate so much power in the battlefield. Now, the entire thing gets you to the fact that DEWs today are not handheld systems. They might be tomorrow, but not now. So first we'll touch upon microwave systems. Now what I'll do is, you understand what a microwave system is. It's a small clip for about 4-5 minutes. It's about a microwave oven, but it tells you everything about what a microwave is. It'll give you a full understanding of it. Then we'll get back to the weapon part of it.
General Shankar, we can't hear him. Was it intentional?
No,
we
no,
can't
no,
hear
sir.
him. Okay. We
Oh,
can't hear him
wait.
at all.
1 minute, sir. No, no, no. It was so it was meant that you could hear it fully. Can you hear him now?
No, sir.
That's some.
We cannot hear him yet.
Sir, if you turn on the subtitles, we'll be able to see it, sir. Not even if the audio doesn't come. Just if you see it in the video, we'll be able to. You can play the video, and there's a CC option there. Yes, sir. Sir, please unmute yourself, sir.
Yeah. You can hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, right. So we just saw how a microwave, basic microwave system functions. Okay. Now, if I get back to the military way of doing things, microwaves are an electronic magnetic radiation. We know it has got a longer wavelength and much lower frequency than light, right? But it travels at the speed of light. Now, generally, microwave frequencies are in the zero point 0.1 to 100 gigahertz. This is the wavelengths, right? And the oxygen and water vapor can absorb radiation in the microwave region. So, if on a rainy day, a microwave will not function that well. And liquid water interacts well with microwaves. We saw that in the video. And that's the fundamental of the way microwave systems function. Now, if I look, I turn this around 90 degrees. If you see, this is the way the military use of microwaves go. This is what you see. You can see, high frequency stuff for missile seekers and low frequency stuff for search radars, which are better than the normal radars. Okay, you can use it for many of this thing. Now, if you see in this, nowhere have they come out with the fact that it can be used as a directed energy weapon. And this chart is pretty old, mind you. Now, when you look at the microwave system, one of the few things which you see is it has to come from a directed antenna. It can't go anywhere. It travels along a line of sight. You need a line of sight. It doesn't bend because it's very high frequency. If the object is directly not visible, it is not affected. You have to be in its line of sight. And due to large wavelengths, they spread much more than light. Light doesn't disperse as much as microwaves do. And ultimately, the ranges get limited. Rain and water vapor, it restricts the microwave propagation. Now, as a comparison, if a laser beam is fired like a bullet, from a rifle, a microwave beam is more like a shotgun a shot from a shotgun. It scatters, right? It's like a scatter beam. So the moment anything scatters, the range gets limited. Now, what has been seen is microwaves are not suited for precision destruction of threatening targets. Right. What are the best suited for? The best suited for soft targets with built-in vulnerabilities, which microwave can exploit. The best potential for use of microwaves is against electronics. But does it mean you can't use it for, active systems? No. This is what has been developed by US. So we'll have a look at this. Right. We just saw what the US capability is. It is basically used for riot control. Now we'll have a look at the Chinese capability, which was displayed, and this, mind you, was displayed just about 2 years back.
I think by mistake he has logged out. He should be in again.
Bala, just call him up and check, please.
Yes, sir. Doing it, sir.
Now, while we wait for him, Mr. L.V. Krishnan can fill in the gap. If you could kindly, start talking about it.
I hope the Chinese have not interfered with the presentation.
Never know, sir. Never know.
He's just joining in, sir.
That means C3S has made the grade.
I think this is technology for us.
But this looks far-fetched. Oh, God.
It lets you down at the right time.
Sir is back.
Right.
He has to unmute.
So you just have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Perfect, sir.
You can see the slide?
Yes, sir.
Right. Okay. So, like I was saying, we saw the Chinese system also. These are huge systems, and as you saw, the ranges are very limited. We are still far away from being employed tactically. In ships, yes. But then again, the ranges, if you have to get to as close as 1 kilometer to next ship, I don't think it is a useful thing. Yes, for electronics, it's very good. Then I'll touch upon this issue of what Commodore Vasan had said about it being used against US Embassy people. It was used in Havana. It was called the Havana effect. But this effect is not new, and it was suspected that the Russians have used it. Way back in 1961, there's an American neuroscientist who was called Alan Frey, who discovered this effect and it's called the Frey effect, where, when you are in the way of a RF energy source, you get a buffeting of the head, buzz, clicking, hiss, or knocking. Now, this is also not very clearly certified whether this happens or not. But then the fact is that this Havana effect has happened, so I'll take it that this can happen. Even for this Frey effect to take place, one has to be very close, right? So you can't use the microwave systems up close. But yeah, you can use microwaves as radars. You can use for other things, right? Now I'll touch upon lasers. Okay, I'll have to go back. This is again this small little video for you to understand what laser and all it's all about. For those, and it's a very simple video like the earlier one. Yeah, can you hear me still?
Yes, sir. Perfect.
Okay, good. Right. Now we've just seen that part of the thing. We've understood what a laser is and how a laser comes out. Now, these are the properties of a laser which we use in weapons also. Monochromatic, it is coherent, polarized, collimated, and high energy. The most important is this business of high energy as far as weapons are concerned. Right. Now, when you look at laser applications, you have a whole lot of applications where lasers have gone in. Like Mr. Krishnan said, lasers have found more application in the civil field than in the military field as of now. It's not that they have not found application in the military field, they have, but not as weapons truly. And this is where I think we have fallen short in India, that there is a requirement to have civil military fusion and exploit the use of lasers in the military, which we have really not done. When you look at military applications for space communication and fiber optic communications, laser shows, we definitely have used lasers even in the military. Then for laser range finding, target designation, blinding, laser weapons, extremely useful, and we are using it even today. The only issue is this business of directed energy weapons we'll talk about. But then lasers have tremendous use in GIS systems. Your fiber optic lasers are the best things for GIS. Any INS platform today, virtually a high precision INS platform, inertial navigation system platform, uses a fiber optic laser. Now there are different types of lasers. Okay, we'll not go into it. The latest lasers are the solid state lasers, which basically are used for weapon states. Now, when you look at laser weapons, you have low energy lasers, you have medium energy and high energy. Right? Now, these lasers are used for jamming or destruction of sensors, but that is basically by communication. Okay? And when you get to this, you say, okay, I'll destroy their optoelectronic devices. When you want to destroy material, it is high energy. What I said in the beginning, you need to transfer that energy onto that material for that material to disintegrate or something adverse to happen. And that transfer has to take place over a period of time. If you want it to happen instantaneously, then the energy has to be very high. So it's a function of time on the target and the intensity. The moment you increase the intensity or you need a high energy laser, the energy requirements itself defeat you. So that is where we are as far as laser weapons are concerned. Right? So fundamentally, lasers need power to damage a target. So you have to carry it on a large platform. Yeah, lasers allow you replenishment of the medium because it's like unlike a gun, you don't have to keep reloading it. We just need one surge of electricity to generate lasers. Okay, but in the earlier stages, when you spoke of gas lasers and all that, they could only be fired for a limited time before returning to base till the gas functioned or the ruby laser didn't degrade. Today, solid state lasers and fiber lasers, these are all, they can endure. And then you have a high energy through lithium ion batteries to give you, this combination gives you high energy lasers. This is where research is going. Russia claims to have deployed operational lasers, but there's no proof that any laser system has actually been deployed. It is more of a prototype which has been used. Okay, Raytheon has got a high energy lasing system, basically used against UAVs. Right, Commodore Vasan also spoke of Thor, that is tactical high-powered operational responder, and basically it's UAVs. Why UAVs? UAVs are slow-moving weapons, right? Of course, the belief is that because it's a laser weapon, you can put energy on the target at the speed of light, and it can be instantaneous heating event. That's, as of now, wishful thinking. But having said that, lasers can be used as terminal defense weapons. They can be used for ships as terminal defense. They can be used for tanks as terminal defense, right? And they can take down swarms of drones in rapid fire. Why drones? Drones are very fragile. Any UAV is, it doesn't have any protection, right? Its electronics are exposed. you can just burn a wire and then the drone goes haywire. So the effect damage is very limited required. I mean, very limited damage is required to offset a swarm. And if you see how a swarm functions, if you hit the mother, the rest of the queen bee of that swarm, the rest of the thing goes, or I mean, it depends on how that swarm is configured. Or you can interfere with the communications in that swarm and the swarm goes haywire. That's how it is done. And like I said, it is very effective against slow-moving targets. Of course, today are talking of ship-based high-energy solid-state lasers. Again, they are short-range defensive weapons. They counter targets at ranges of about 2 kilometers. The advantage of lasers, of course, is the fact that its cost per shot is low, and it's got a deep magazine. The issue here is detecting and monitoring targets. How do you detect the target? How do you monitor the target? You need to have a system. So if you want to fire a laser, it has to be part of a system, but it gives you fast engagement time. It gives you the ability to counter maneuvering missiles. And it can give you the ability for precision engagements. All this is there, but there are huge limitations. Line of sight. Without line of sight, you can't function. Right? So it's best not more than ground to ground. It is best ground to air or air to ground. Atmospheric absorption, scattering, turbulence. Turbulence disturbs communication. Right? How do you counter saturation attacks? Because you can get one laser out. What if a swarm comes? Can you hit all? Do you have the capability to hit all? These are the things which are, these are the technologies which are being looked at. What about hardened targets? If you have a laser and what if the other guy hardens the target? What if just deflects the laser away, just mirrors the laser away? There are various pros and cons, right? What is the risk of collateral damage? After all, in a dogfight kind of a situation, if your aircraft is following other and you shoot a laser, how do you handle this IFF situation? Will you target your own aircraft? So there are a lot of issues the moment you get into lasers from ground to air or air to ground. Okay. Now, the US Army has got a program where they say that by the next year, they're going to have protection by lasers against UAVs, rockets, artillery, and mortars. Again, tall order, we'll have to see how they come out with. They're also developing a real high-energy laser for indirection fire protection capability to counter cruise missiles. And they're also looking at these to hit re-entry kind of missiles, not only cruise missiles, but re-entry kind of missiles. The easier part is the cruise missiles because cruise missile speeds are low. General long-range cruise missiles, whereas MIRVs and re-entry vehicles and all are high-speed systems. Okay, and one of the reasons why people are going in for hyper-velocity systems is to get off these counter effects. Now, improvements in computing from the gaming arena for target tracking and detection, tracking, and holding the laser onto the target. A lot of algorithms from this gaming thing have been taken on and they're being applied. Maybe things have cracked, but it's not seen on ground, right? Fundamental, like I said, identify, track, and maintain aim on a target. How do you reduce jitter in the system? Because anything which produces energy or any thing like a power system produces jitter, wave, and that jitter doesn't let you hold on to the target for the desired effect, or it'll spoil your aim also. And we're looking at small thin pencil beams going and hitting targets which are themselves moving at high speed. So there are a lot of issues. It's not as if okay. Now there was a recent report which said the Indian and US satellites are vulnerable to China's ground-based lasers. And this is what some analysts have said. And they've said that China has acquired full capability to destroy enemy satellite sensors through its lasers. And China can cause great damage to Indian and US satellites during wartime. This is a view. And one such thing comes and everyone starts believing it. For this, I'll explain it in a little more detail. If you look at this as the Earth, the low Earth orbit is anything from 160 to 2000 kilometers. And it is this low Earth where low Earth orbit satellites are flying day in and day out. They are the communication satellites. They are the weapon platforms. They are the ones which, give you navigation assistance and everything. MEO and GEO are basically high-end communication satellites and GIS satellites, which stay all your entire TV system is all on GEOs. This is the battlefield range, and 2000 is too high. Normally, they operate from about 160 kilometers to 800 kilometers above the Earth. So, if you have a communication satellite or a spy satellite or something with a battlefield sensor which is orbiting the Earth in low Earth orbit in a constellation, it is somewhere between 160 kilometers to 800 kilometers. Okay. Now, the whole idea is to hit this satellite with a laser. That's what they say the Chinese can do. Now, if you look at it, there are three methods to kill a satellite. It could be a direct impact kinetic energy kill, as it is done in ASAT, when 2 years back we fired a missile against the satellite. It could be a directed energy weapon or a kill by a blast. Yeah, any of these is feasible theoretically. The issue is this high energy beam or laser has to be generated from a ground or a space-based platform. You can do both. Now the problem is this: how do you generate this high energy intensity beam? Fire to a distance of 300 to 1000 kilometers, or say even 200 to about 800 kilometers at a target. Each satellite moves at about 7 kilometers per second, and you hold it on to the target till its destruction without hitting other satellites. This is all a system of science fiction and comics as of now, and I'll explain to you why. Yeah. So just think of an object which is going at 7 kilometers per second, and you hit it. You first, it's very difficult to catch it. Then it's very difficult to hit it. 7 kilometers per second means actually this satellite will cross India or Pakistan in about 4-5 minutes. Within those 4-5 minutes, you have to catch it, track it, hit it, and kill it. One. Number two, I am of the firm opinion space-based wars are not feasible. Just imagine if you hit a satellite by ASAT or a laser, what happens to that satellite? It disintegrates in the space. And then what does happen? In the Earth, anything which is hit, gravity gets everything down to Earth. But in the space, that doesn't happen. If a satellite breaks out or a weapon breaks out or anything happens, it is space debris. It is there. It is flying. It is in orbit. It continues in orbit at the rate of 7 kilometers per second. Every small particle which comes out of debris becomes an object, and that is free floating, and it can hit anything anywhere. And if an advanced country like China or USA, which has constellation of satellites there, the space debris can hit them anywhere. So it is almost a self goal, right? So this business that space-based war will take place and all, I don't think it will ever happen, because you will be hitting yourself more than hitting others eventually. If you go into the entire discussion which happened when we fired our ASAT weapon system, there was a lot of criticism that India has fired this and there will be so much space debris and it might affect others. In fact, at one point of time, it was felt that the International Space Station, which was 100 kilometers away in a higher orbit than the test which we did, could get affected because of the space debris of the test which we did. So all this is all still far away, right? In the end, in a Sino-Indian situation as it exists today, the chances of using directed energy weapons are quite minimal. I've given you the fundamentals, and you can, all of you are intelligent enough to understand why I'm saying so. Can it happen tomorrow? Yes. Can lasers and microwave be used for auxiliary and supplementary purposes? Yes. They will be used, and there's no doubt about that. right? Can they be used like what Jin Canrong said, that he'll fire and Indians will run away? No. Can we use it so that when we fire, the Chinese will run away? No. Are we doing research on it? Yes, we are. At what stage are we? We are also not very advanced about it. Okay. So this is where I end my talk today. I'm open to questions, and I'm sure many of you will have views about it. Please go ahead.
Thank you, General. I think it was an excellent tutorial on the basics, very much required for many people in the audience. And I think you have also explained how, if you realistically look at things, we don't need to be unduly alarmed at the present stage. And I think you mentioned about science fiction. I'm reminded of H.G. Wells, who wrote the War of the Worlds in the, I think, previous century, I think about 100 years ago. And he spoke about death ray weapon. And I think that has caught on and people have been working on it. Okay. But the point is, science and technology doesn't stand still. And as you said, it's entirely possible, if not for today, it might happen in the years to come, right? And as I find it, I think the advances in science and technology are also becoming more and more rapid now. Okay, so it might perhaps happen sooner than it would have been maybe 2 decades or 3 decades earlier. Okay, so I think it's better to be cautious about it and perhaps be prepared for it, as the Boy Scouts would say.
Yes.
I don't know if there are any questions from the audience. Let me give it to the audience first.
Sir, I'll take the questions from the chat box, sir.
Please.
Thank you, sir. The first question is from Mr. Danish Sankain. He has asked, direct energy weapons and lasers for now as weapons are extremely costly and requires a good amount of research. They are also not mobile too. Then how can we make them as efficient in the battlefield where point of sight warfare carries on?
Look, like Professor Dr. Krishnan said, today it is not at, the technologies have not come to that level. But the way technology is going and the way it is geometrically progressing, I wouldn't be surprised maybe in about 5-10 years that you will have lightweight systems where you can point and fire. But and you know, the way laser, in fact, my hope is more in the lasers. I wouldn't say hope, my prediction is more in the form of lasers. Lasers have more potential to become weapons as directed energy weapons than microwaves. Microwaves will still remain, you know, directed energy weapons against electronics, whereas lasers will be used more for kill purposes. And lasers will be used more for kill purposes against hard targets, which give a certain amount of static position or attitude towards you rather than human beings, right? There's another thing of aiming. You have to aim onto the target. Now, if you aim through a rifle, you'll know that a human being at 400 meters is, you know, a speck. So whether you have a point weapon or not, you have to first aim. So that means you are getting into another system, and you have to depend on another system, and they are not standalone weapons. You need to have a system in place. But I think maybe next decade you should start seeing lethal stuff on the battlefield.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I have a question.
Yeah.
What kind of institutionalized approach should India take to develop on these lines of technology?
See, it's a very valid question, and this is something which Mr. Krishnan first said. Lasers came to India in the 60s, 70s, right? And we have used it. But have we taken it to our logical conclusion? We have not. And it is not only lasers, it is not only microwave stuff, so many other applications, right? Our space-based applications, or even our own nuclear energy issues. Okay, and fundamental to tomorrow is energy. We are talking of fuel cells. All these technologies we need to take, or for that matter, your cyber technology, your technology related to computers. Okay, semiconductors. Now, all these dual-use technologies, we need to have a national approach. And this is something which America did in the last century of civil-military fusion. Okay, and that's how they became a superpower. If you go one century before, the Britishers did it during the Industrial Revolution. Then this century, the Chinese are doing it. I mean, today there's volumes being written on the Chinese civil-military fusion. We have to do it. Unless we do it, we are going nowhere. Unless we amalgamate our space research and military advances, we are going nowhere. Because space teaches you more about not only these technologies, it's also about lightweight technologies. I mean, just give it a thought. Most of our battlefields are in high altitude. Okay, space is also high altitude. Space is extreme high altitude. I mean, after all, as you keep going up, it's the same thing. In space, you have to exist on your own. Everything you need to exist has to be taken up. So you have to do in high altitudes also. At 20,000 feet, even breathing is a problem if you've gone there. I've stayed in 20,000, I'm telling you with this thing, right? So these technologies are dual-use technologies. Unless we have a national program where we focus on dual-use technologies, where we see how you can transfer use from the civil to the military field, we are out of the game. As a nation, we have to do that.
Bala, may I say something here? I think you can have a national program, but the question is how is it implemented? See, what I find is there is something that is lacking in this country, which is that industries have not been a part of this. Take, for instance, the developments in the national laboratories. We mentioned about laser developments. Now, I mentioned also that Bawalkar, after his retirement, went and started a company, okay, to produce lasers. Now, if instead of waiting for a person to retire to start a company, if somebody in a laboratory, government laboratory, has been able to produce something, if you allow him to start up an outfit, okay, today I think there are venture capital provisions also available, and you give him also an opportunity to do that, try it out. If it works out, he will continue there. If it doesn't work out, he will come back to your laboratory because he has been an asset to you. And if that happens, if the startup is actually allowed, that startup should be having an umbilical cord with the laboratory for such activities like calibration, okay, advice from the experts here, things like that. Only then it would succeed. Now we have not only the civil military, but I think university industry relations in US. And I think we must have, of course, our universities are not much to speak about today, but then there are many government laboratories which are doing something, okay, and I think they should be also able to interact with the industry. Now, all this talk about technology transfer, I think the way that is being conceived doesn't work out very well. I've seen that also in the Department of Atomic Energy.
I'll give you a very small. I mean, I go with him 100%. Our government as a whole doesn't have that thinking of amalgamating everything. I'll give you a small thing: lithium-ion batteries. Lithium-ion batteries today in India are mostly imported. They are imported from either Korea or China. We have the technology. We have everything. In Chennai, there is a small unit, pilot plant, under a CSIR lab, which makes lithium-ion batteries the way you want it, in any form you want it. Okay, and I interact with the person who's put that plant up. I ask him, why don't you go big? Why don't you transfer this technology to someone? He says it becomes costly. Why does it become costly? Because unless the government doesn't subsidize it, it doesn't become cheap. It doesn't become viable. You can't proliferate it. So you can't make it. So you're dependent again on Korea and China because your government is not involved in it. So there's a problem. And on the other hand, you look at Huawei and ZTE. Both are military grade, companies, and they're competing for your 5G, right? And why? Because the Chinese government has subsidized it. Its subsidy is so high that in 10 years, he'll make it so cheap for you for the first 10 years that you have no choice but to go for it. and after that he'll make it so costly for you can't get out of it. So that's the problem. It's a policy issue. It's not as if we don't have the technology or we don't have the brains to do it.
Yeah, it's not just also the program. I think you have the policy also. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. The next question is by Mr. Avinash Kumar. He has asked, where does India stand in terms of having microwave weapons in comparison of China and USA? And what should be the approach of India, either defensive or offensive, in order to tackle these weapons?
See, as far as microwaves weapons are concerned, I don't think we have any offensive weapons. Let's be frank, not many have it. Yeah, we are getting into using microwave for against electronics. Yes, there is some research going on, but have we fielded a weapon? No, not that I know of. Right? Definitely, if there's a technology and there's a weapon system, we have to go in for it sooner or later. Right? But it needs support. But of course, fundamentally, it also comes down to priorities and what we can afford. Today, we are in a system where we can't afford the basics and we can't convert our fundamental technology into weapon systems. See, our framework, it is not, again, I keep repeating, it is not our capability which is lacking. It is our framework which is lacking. Today, you would have seen, 75 India, submarines, 6 submarines the DAC has cleared, right? And it is through strategic partnership. This entire business strategic partnership in this program has been lying for 5 years with the government of India and the MOD just for this decision on the DAC. It's taken 5 years for them to decide that we should have this. It will take another 15 years for you to see the first submarine out of the whole story, the way we are progressing, and then you have to afford it. So there are huge issues. Our bigger problem is not the ability, but our policy or structure or higher way of doing things.
Thank you, sir. Sir, another question. I have a question. How does the direct energy weapons fare against electronic equipments or components?
Yeah, electronic equipment, you have a clear hit. Okay, because see, electronics are easy to interfere with. Okay, you can interfere, you can burn out electronics, everything. So, as microwaves are very effective against electronics, so are lasers. After all, what does it take for one small semiconductor to malfunction? Its chip or the board has to burn at one point, and that's the end of the story. Even a chance hit will kill it. So that is why, whether it's a laser or for that matter for a microwave, they're used mostly as terminal defense weapons, and they're quite useful, right? But the use of microwaves or lasers are more effective in other systems. Microwave radars are better. Use them for radars because that's something which is useful. And lasers, rangefinders, GIS, fiber optics, communications, the whole range is there. Again, here, we have no technology of our own for fiber optic communications. You're not trying to import. Till you develop your own fiber optics and with your own lasers, right, for communication, you will not get into the next level. We need to do it on our own, which we lack.
Thank you, sir. As a corollary to that, I have 2 quick questions.
Yeah.
One is keeping this direct energy weapons as a central piece. What are the psychological implications like the troop morale, etc., as a part of the larger information warfare campaign by possessing such weapons? And in your view, do you think China played its card well?
Look, China, okay, first at the troop level, no one bothers. Because at the troop level, this damn thing wouldn't have gone down to troops. Troops, when I was commanding my troops, I didn't know what China was speaking. So we are quite layered out, okay? And in a place like Ladakh, no one is looking at, Australian or UK Times or something like this, what is Jim Ken wrong and all, they won't know. So this entire story of this information warfare, influence ops and all that is at a higher level. It is hitting your leaders' minds. It is hitting our minds. It is hitting the international, this thing. Influence ops influence people. They don't influence troops. Troops, though, it doesn't matter them. Although he is looking at the dushman and hitting, that's all. Simple and straight. Don't worry. That I'm not bothered about at all. In fact, let me share something with you. I got around to someone in Ladakh last year when this thing came out, and I asked him, "Yeah, were any directed energy weapons used in that area?" So the question I said, "Sir, ये क्या होता है?" So I said, "Yeah, kya? If you don't know what it is, then you don't know what has happened. Nothing has happened." So that gave me a lot of answers, right? And this guy, he was right there. Okay. So anything of this kind happens unnatural in the battlefield, it generally one comes to know. So the awareness itself is not there. So I leave it at that.
Thank you, sir. Another question as a part of this which I had was, considering the asymmetry between India and China in defense, how can this be tackled by India in case China uses this weapon against India?
See, firstly, like I said, the use of this weapon is still far away, 10 years away, maybe 5 years away, maybe 3 years away. It's not today, right? And then even if, just think, I showed the Chinese truck to you. Just think of this huge truck which has to come within 1 kilometer of you in high altitude, chugging up a bloody slope on a single track. All you have to do is blow it up away, right? And if the moment one is deployed on ground, people will say there's something funny coming up. Okay, now everyone would be aware. Generally, after this, what I learned is this has been disseminated to people to look out for such a truck. So the first thing is you take a bloody RPG and shoot it out, and then that's the end of the story. Second, there is a larger issue which I want to put across, and to put across to all of you, which you have to understand. Everyone talks that we are in a state of asymmetry with China. I don't think so. First, let's get that clearly into your head. Everyone says China's comprehensive national power is 10 times India's or 20 times India. Those figures keep coming out. And China is supposed to have great military thing, their military is so much X times this thing. That's all fine. That's all paper. And things don't work out that way on the battlefield. Just think, between Taliban and America, what is the quotient of this comprehensive national power and all this nonsense? And asymmetry? It would be something in the order of 1,000,000 to 1. The kind of military which America has and what Taliban has. But yet, who's winning? So in the battlefield, it is fighting on the battlefield which wins the day. 1. 2, any battlefield is a space, and that space is taken up only by that many troops and no more. If you put more troops there, it's counterproductive to you. Your logistics increase and your vulnerabilities increase. You have to disperse on a battlefield. You have to go inside ground in a battlefield. You have to sustain in a battlefield. So every battlefield is only that much troops which can be placed. Whether it's China or India, whether he has more troops or not. Okay, so in a 3,600 kilometer battlefield, they can only place that much and we can also place that much. As of now, both are equal. Third, in a battlefield, you are asymmetric depending on the role you play. India is generally going to be defensive, and then you're going to counterpunch into the Chinese. Whereas the Chinese have to come offensive. In high altitude, the force ratios which are required are 6 to 10, and at times it might go up to 12. Okay. In many cases and many exercises in those heights, I have actually walked and done exercises. When you go into an attack against an opponent at 16,000 feet, in the last 50, 30, 60 meters, when you charge, the opponent comes out and gives a hand and drags you up and says, "Aaja yaar, chai pee lo mere saath." It's not easy. Okay. Tanks don't function. An engine of a vehicle at that height, super high altitude, finishes off in 3 months. A brand new engine, you can't get anything. You will not move 10 feet in 3 months. It's gone. There's no oxygen. It has to work on 20% oxygen. All IC engines need oxygen. I mean, you should see the amount of smoke a diesel engine, puts out at 16,000 feet. There's no traction. It's not an easy battlefield. So we are very strong there. Remember, we have been in Siachen from 1984. We have been fighting in Siachen at minus 20, minus 40 degrees from 1984. You can't wish it away. In fact, the way I look at it, Chinese are in a state of asymmetry vis-a-vis us. People have to understand this. Yeah, sitting in Chennai, all that is, China looks big. That's all. Same thing. Even for the Navy, people think that China will come into bloody Indian Ocean and do everything it wants. It can't. Anyone from the Navy will tell me that the South China Sea is a shallow sea, full of shoals, rocks, everything. Why do you think China has not developed as a naval power? Because it is not a naval power. Their long-term strategy is to get into Indian Ocean. They can't. So there is more to, what shall I say, fighting on the battlefield, wherever it is, whether in the sea or in the land. Okay, Indian Ocean is a deep sea ocean. It's not a shallow ocean like the South China Sea. The whole story is different. So we shouldn't ever worry about this business of asymmetry. I mean, one should be confident that we'll take them on. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. It's very reassuring. And speaking of the Navy, and it has appeared, next question is by Commodore Vijesh Garg, sir. He has asked, considering the very high power requirements and limited ranges, can the direct energy weapons be effectively utilized from ships?
Yeah, eventually they will be. In fact, the first platform where a directed energy weapon can be used, or the potential, is in a ship. Because ships have the ability to generate power. They're large platforms, they're heavy platforms, right? Eventually, the first place where it's going to be used, and of course, you get line of sight. A curvature of 20 kilometers. For 20 kilometers, you get clean line of sight. And ships are tall structures. So, ship in the Navy, it's the most. In the battlefield, in high altitudes, out of question. Right? And in any case, everything gets frozen here. All this laser, pooser, and all, it just gets frozen. Do you know that in a high altitude, if you have to start a diesel vehicle in the morning, you have to put a blowtorch under a tank to defreeze its diesel? Even after putting thinners in it, it's 80% kerosene. Fuel in high altitude is 80% kerosene. It freezes. You have to put a blowtorch, melt the diesel, otherwise it doesn't go into the injector. They are fundamentals. Right? High technology in our battlefield against China is still far away. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
I have a question, Bala.
Yeah.
Please, sir.
Please, sir.
General, I want to ask you about EMP weapons.
Yes.
I think the DRDO also has come out saying that they are having an EMP bomb. Okay. Now, what is that? Why are they talking about it before they actually have tested it, or have they tested it?
So they might have tested it, because testing an EMP is not a difficult affair. Right? Testing an EMP in a miniature form is not a great issue. And the effects are quite clear. After all, you are generating an electromagnetic pulse with minimum fallout. So that electromagnetic pulse will fry out all our electronics. Right? And they can be used at high altitude. The moment you release it at high altitude, the spread is more. The only problem with the EMP, which is why many people don't use the EMP, is it can affect your own communications. It will fry out, because once you put a electromagnetic pulse out, depending on the energy which you are releasing and the radius it is going to affect, virtually it can affect you also. And so that is the problem. So any EMP has to be in depth. Now, if you release you can't have a ground burst and a EMP, because that's not value. So it has to be a low air burst. A low air burst in depth, what are you going to do? What is the targeting? So there are many issues practically in EMP. but it's got tremendous value.
But the range also is not very high, I believe, because the kind of weapons that are being described now, okay, I think they don't have such a high capacity.
So that is that's all in trial stage. That's I will say no-go area today. I mean, I wouldn't say no-go area. That's a very diffused area. If you look at the Hiroshima bomb, it affected entire Tokyo, right? It affected, Nagasaki. It affected Nagasaki and Hiroshima fully, right? And that had a lot of EMP. It fried everything out.
No, I think in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, it was not so much EMP, it was the heat radiation, thermal radiation.
No, sir, people, I understand what you're saying. I mean, it was thermal, secondary, and primary radiation, and a blast, everything. No, I'm not talking about the casualties. There was EMP. EMP is a byproduct of any atomic explosion, right? So, in this EMP bomb, you are only minimizing the fallout, right? And you're maximizing the pulse. I'll not go into how it is done, that's a different story. But the problem is in controlling it, and the problem is in delivery and where and how you target it. There are other issues, but it's a very potent weapon. If, for example, if I want to, put down Chinese communication systems and I want to hurt China badly, I can put a EMP just on Beijing. In such a case, yes, if you use it as a counter value targeting principle, the potential is very high. But if you look at it as a counter force weapon, it cuts two ways. I mean, it's the way you use it.
Makes sense, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Bala, you can carry on if there are many questions.
Thank you, sir. There's a question by Commodore Vasan, sir. He has asked, what are the updates on the Kali project, the kilo ampere linear injector? There were reports about the use for development of LCA along with the Kali project. Any updates on that as a shield for LCA?
I really won't know, so I won't like to comment on it. I mean, I'm not in a picture of it at all. But I know, last time I heard someone talking of lasers about 2 years back, I gave a talk in Engineers India conference. And the guy who was handling lasers for DRDO spoke. And his script was, I don't have money, I don't have resources, I don't have, facilities, infrastructure, X, Y, Z. So he gave me a very bleak picture. So I suppose something similar would be there for the microwave systems also.
Thank you, sir. There's a question by Mr. Ryan. He has asked, is there any scope in using DEW as short-range defense systems? If so, how does it compare with existing infrared and EMP systems?
See, like I said, for short-range point defense, it is still on. Not more than microwave lasers are still on. Even microwaves are still on. As far as you know that they're heat-seeking systems or with the active seekers, you can disable them. And the active defense system or the active point systems, Israelis have developed for the tanks also. Terminal defense, fully on. Not as offensive weapons. They have fully developed systems for terminal defense. And against UAVs, they're going to be tremendously effective.
Thank you, sir. We have come to the last question of the Q&A session, which is by Commodore Vasan, sir. He has asked, there were reports by Lockheed Martin on equipping aircraft with laser pods. When do you think this will be operationalized? I'm sure DRDO was also working on such operations. Any updates, please?
So laser pods, it depends on what they're using it for. If they're using it for laser pointing, yes. Even we have them. I mean, let me be very frank. We also have UAVs with laser pointers, where you can, or for that matter, for laser guided bombs, whether you want to, for target designation, they're already there. Whether they are for kill purposes is a question mark. Most of the normal UAVs, even today, third-rate UAVs, let me put it, not even first-rate UAVs, third-rate UAVs have a laser pointing device. And that is good enough for laser designation because most of the laser bombs have a symmetry with the kind of lasers which are used for designation. So it's not a big thing. Hitting a target with a laser is a different question.
Thank you, sir. We have come to the end of the Q&A session. Thank you very much for patiently taking all our questions. May I now request the chair and moderator, Shri LVK sir, to
Yeah.
present his concluding remarks, please.
Thank you. I think it has been a fascinating session. I think we learned a lot more. I still have one more question to General. I read a report about a week ago that there was a, well, Global Times, I don't have to believe the Global Times, but there was a
Yeah.
report apparently, right, that a Chinese helicopter was shot down. I don't know if you have seen that, and I found it apparently from an Indian defense site. Okay, and apparently that was removed also. Again, that is a Global Times practice. Okay, they put out something and then they delete it after a few days or perhaps even earlier. Now, have you heard about this?
No, sir. To be very honest, no.
Okay, I'll send you the.
Yeah, yeah.
Have a
But
look at
again,
it.
if you want to put a helicopter down, you have to interfere with its electronics.
Through EMP, they say.
Yeah, these are Global Times will do what they want. But I don't. I like I said, sir. The point is, the problem with EMP is it is ubiquitous and it is it's not unidirectional.
That's right.
It is 360 degrees. So whatever you put out a EMP, from where it bursts, where till its range and its radius, everyone gets hurt.
Unless you toss a bomb and get away.
You have to get away, right? So you have to get out of its range. So I'm very skeptical about what the Chinese do, and from their I mean, one also has to understand from their demonstrated ability to their advertised ability. There's a huge gap.
And as you pointed out earlier, the advertisement is not necessarily for the people on the ground, but it is for the policymakers.
See, I have seen the Chinese across the LAC. They are exactly 4 feet tall. And they bloody beg for cigarettes also. I mean, can you imagine? This superpower army, वो बीड़ी मांगते हैं आपसे. ठीक है, वो उतना ही है. He's a bloody bigger idiot than our people. Our Indians are much more smarter than those fellows. We know how to sort them out. So,
it's been a very highly reassuring session.
I'm not joking, sir. I've seen them across Demchok. I've seen them across Sikkim. I've seen them across Kibitu. I've seen them across North Sikkim. I've discussed with commanding officers. They're not that great. I mean, we shouldn't have. I don't worry about them. That is why my tone and tenor of my writing.
That's right.
And I'm sure many veterans here will agree with me. You look already. 4 centuries pehle, one admiral came to bleed in Malabar coast, so he's conquered India. He must have come and asked water in Malabar coast, कि भाई पानी पिला दो हमें. And now they say that fellow is a very great guy here. I mean, look at it from a slightly different perspective, sirs. Have you seen any Chinese settlement here? No. But you see, Tamils have gone to Malaysia, they have gone to Singapore. How have they gone? They've gone to Burma. How have they gone? They've gone by sea. Who's more seafaring? I mean, do you find Chinese here?
Right.
We have gone to Saudi Arabia, we have gone to Africa. It is not, Patels have gone to Africa and, Naidus are there in South Africa. Those days, they went by ship only, seafaring. We have some fundamental qualities which we don't recognize.
Historically, of course, they will claim that Zheng He had come here.
One bloody eunuch came and won. What are you talking, sir?
And he was not a Chinese.
He was not a Chinese also, he was a Mongol.
Yes. Right.
Thank you,
Okay,
sir.
thank you very much. Thank you very much, General.
Sir, can I say one
fascinating
small thing,
session.
sir?
Yeah,
We
yeah,
learned a
please.
lot. Thank you. I think we must really admire your patience to come down to the level of the common people here who don't have much information about the defense weapons and things like that. They have come down to our level and explained things to us. Thank you very much.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. It was indeed reassuring, and so many thumbs up were raised from Colonel Hariharan, sir, Commodore Vasu, sir, and everyone. May I now request my colleague, Ms. Padma Shri, to formally present the vote of thanks. Over to you, Padma.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, all. I thank C3S for giving me the opportunity to present this vote of thanks. We sincerely thank Lieutenant General P.R. Shankar, former Director General of Artillery, retired, and a distinguished member of C3S for his valuable time, giving us an intriguing presentation with explanatory videos from the fundamentals of directed energy weapons, technical aspects of laser, its varied application, to India's stand, and responding to all our questions profoundly. Thank you very much, sir. I also take this opportunity to thank the Director of C3S, Commodore R.S. Vasan, Indian Navy retired, for his enduring support. Our sincere thanks goes to L.V. Krishnan, former Director, Safety Research Group, Indira Gandhi Center for Atomic Research, Kalpakkam, for moderating the discussion and giving your recommendations duly. Thank you, sir. We express our gratitude to all the officers, veterans, research scholars, and interns present here for their active participation. I extend my thanks to my colleagues, Ms. Nisha and Mr. Balasubramaniam, for their support. Thank you all once again. Jai Hind.